So hello and welcome to yet another episode of Geographics. I'm your interim host Karl and today we're talking about the Tigris-Euphrates river system, a cradle of civilization. And as with all of our videos, this one is based on a script submitted to us by a member of our writing team, that being Larry Holsworth. Give them a follow on their social media links below if they've been provided to us. And just an aside, I did look up the pronunciation for the Tigris-Euphrates river system, and over here in the West it's sometimes pronounced the Tigris, but in Syria and Iraq and those regions of the world, they pronounce it the Tigris, so that's the pronunciation I'll use because that's where the river is. Anyway, let's get to it. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which run into the eastern Mediterranean Sea, have been considered a cradle of civilization since the days of antiquity. The rivers rise in Asia in the mountainous region of eastern Turkey and then descend through modern-day Syria and Iraq. The land between them during much of their parallel courses is part of the region known as the Fertile Crescent, where the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia arose. There are those believers in the Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament who claim the Tigris-Euphrates river system was the location of the mythical Garden of Eden as described in Genesis. Biblical literalists consider the region the first location occupied by humanity until Adam and Eve were banished for their miscreant behaviour regarding the Tree of Knowledge when they ate an ambrosia. Whether or not the biblical Eden was located in the Tigris-Euphrates river system is somewhat immaterial. Subsequent civilizations emerged there, became empires, and then retired from the stage of history altogether. It is a region important to the development and subsequent evolution of the Abrahamic religions and cultures regardless. The ancient Sumerians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Acadians all built empires in the lands watered by the two rivers and their many tributaries. Over the millennia, both rivers' courses have changed due to natural events and the activities of humanity exploiting them for drinking water, waste removal, navigation, trade, and irrigation. Both are ecologically challenged in the 21st century. Both rivers and the lands between them suffer from the scars of war, both ancient and sadly quite recent. Their story is part of the emergence and continuing evolution of civilization in the region. Here is just a small fragment of that history. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. No, I'm kidding. Can you imagine? So all this time, it was all lead up to, we in Bible class now. But no, Genesis is the first book in the Christian Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible known as the Bereshit in Hebrew. Along with the ensuing 4 books, it comprises the Hebrew Torah, with the authorship attributed to, by tradition, Moses. More recent biblical scholarship and archaeology dates the writing of Genesis to around 600 BC, many centuries after Moses is believed to have lived. And most scholars believe the book and its stories of the creation to be mythological, based on tales long handed down via oral tradition before they ever appeared in writing. In regards to Genesis, it's actually weirdly clear on where exactly the biblical Garden of Eden was located, describing its region in chapter 2. In Genesis 2:10-14, it says, "A river is described as running out of Eden to water the garden, after which it splits into 4 separate streams, and the name of the 3rd river is the Tigris. That is it which goeth towards the east ashore, and the 4th river is the Euphrates." And for anyone curious, the Tigris and the Euphrates do run separately across a large part of the region of Mesopotamia, before joining into one stream prior to draining into the sea. Much of their running to the sea, they are more or less parallel, so there could be, a garden in there somewhere. Genesis is altogether more silent on the destination of Adam and Eve after their expulsion from the garden, which was then guarded by a flaming sword and a cherubim to prevent their return. I feel like you could take out one cherubim. I don't know what a cherubim is, but I feel like I could take it. Unless it's biblically accurate angel, no way, give up. But cherubim, that's like one of those little babies with wings, right? I could kick the ass on them. So if Eden ever was watered by the joint Tigris and Euphrates river, and they in turn by their various tributaries, the 2 rivers were not the source of the human race. Adam and Eve's sons were not born until after their exile, which means some other unknown locale is the source of human existence. Yet the Tigris and the Euphrates system appear many times in history, and there is no discounting their importance in the establishment of civilization in the region, known as the Fertile Crescent. So between 6000 and 5000 BC, during a period known as the Bronze Age, civilization built on agriculture emerged in the region between and along the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Sumer civilization is the oldest thus discovered so far in the Mesopotamian region. Their origin is unknown, but the Sumerians, who were mainly farmers and traders of crops, called themselves the Black-Headed People. This is known because among their many contributions to civilization is the creation of written text itself. The Sumerians established cities thanks in part to their success in developing an agricultural system which produced more than enough food to feed themselves as well as trade with others. Among these many cities was the community of Uruk in what is modern-day southern Iraq. There, in approximately 3200 BC, an ancient Sumerian created a clay tablet with a pictorial hieroglyphs rather than letters which describe payment of workers through the dispense of beer. Other Sumerian tablets have been found and interpreted to contain recipes for beer. Surprisingly, or maybe not, these mirror how beer is made today. Corn water, right? Not too tough, but hell yeah, getting paid in beer. It's basically what I do. What do you think I do with payment for these videos? Whether beer was the preferred beverage due to water quality being poor is a subject of a lot of speculation. Whether Sumerians were the first known people to adopt organised farming and harvesting of crops is also subject to healthy scholarly debate. The Sumerians were improvers of the land, digging canals to further exploit the river systems of the region to irrigate their fields and transport their crops to other nations and cities to, make money. By the 4th millennium BC, the Sumerian civilization was divided into city-states, the largest of these being Eridu, founded in about 5400 BC near the mouth of the Euphrates River. This is not far from the site of present-day Basra in Iraq. Eridu was considered to be both a trading and religious hub. The Sumerians gathered in these city-states, each with their own rulers, until they were just gradually absorbed into an empire by the Ateneium of the city-state Lagash around 2500 BC. His was one of the world's first dynastic empires, although it had left the stage of history by around 2370 BC. His empire was followed by that of Lugal-Sarshi, who conquered most of Sumer, including the city of Uruk, and claimed an empire which stretched uninterrupted from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He was the last ethnic Sumerian ruler to reign in the region. The Akkadians were a Semitic people whose language and religion differed somewhat from the Sumerians, and who conquered most of the Sumerian city-states under the rule of Sargon the Great, beginning in the mid-24th century BC. Within a century, the Akkad had united all the Sumerian civilizations under their rule, and the Sumerian language began to be displaced by the Semitic Akkadian language. Ancient Sumerian then became a language similar to Latin in the modern world, kept alive most by scholars and scientists rather than the discourse of the common people. The Acadian Empire lasted through numerous dynastic kings until roughly 2150 BC. It was marked by several wars, including uprisings within the imperial structure. It featured an agricultural economy with extensive farmlands well watered by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Livestock was primarily sheep and goats, who, that's cute. And taxes were paid to the government via skins, meat, and cheese collected by the temples. So, how much money do I owe? $5,000. Here's some cheese. Make those student loans go away. Both Akkad and Sumer differed from a lack of timber, ore, and stone for building, which led to them to trade their crops to make up for the shortfall. Trading partners including the regions to the east in the lands now known as India and Pakistan. Akkadian art included detailed statues and friezes, as well as steles and tablets, many of which still exist today. The Akkadian artists displayed an advanced craftsmanship in their work, rendering statues in lead and copper of their gods, goddesses, and people they like the look of. The Acadian Empire collapsed in the mid-22nd century for reasons not entirely understood. Internal warfare, external warfare, and possibly severe droughts are thought to have brought down the once great civilization, though the fertile nature of the region soon gave birth to yet another. The next major empire to dominate the region was that of Hammurabi and the Babylonians. They were an Akkad-speaking people, and the Babylonian Empire may be more accurately called the Hammurabian Empire, since it did not survive very long after the death of its founder, the aforementioned and awesomely named Hammurabi. Babylon was a city-state in Mesopotamia when Hammurabi ascended to its throne due to his father's failing health in or around the year 1792 BC. Hammurabi was the sixth Amorite king of Babylon, the Amorites being a Semitic people who controlled much of the lands of Mesopotamia from 21st to the 17th century BC. Their influence and control extended beyond the accepted bounds of Mesopotamia to Egypt and the Levant. Hammurabi was a warrior king whose effective armies led to his conquest of several of the more influential city-states of Mesopotamia. Yet he's chiefly remembered for his establishment of the Code of Hammurabi, a legal system which first introduced many of the concepts still prevalent in Western legal codes. Hammurabi claimed he received the code which bears his name from the sun god Shamash, who was also the Babylonian god of justice, which, makes sense. The Code of Hammurabi established specific crimes and the punishments that would be meted out to those who violated the law. Where past legal codes very often focused on the retribution allowed for those who were victims of crime, Hammurabi's code limited personal vengeance and instead recognised society as a whole as the victim of many crimes, and thus society as a whole would be responsible for the punishment meted out to those who broke it. The Hammurabi Code also introduced the idea of innocence until proven guilty, with the burden of proof on the accuser, not the accused. Prescribed penalties for crimes were spelled out, as were the manner in which courts could deal with the accused. By the time of the Babylonian Empire, the activities of humanity within the Tigris-Euphrates river system were already having a measurable impact on the environment, to say the least. Canals for the transportation of crops as well as the irrigation of fields connected rivers and their tributaries. They made it easier to water the fields, sure, and to move grains and livestock from farms to markets, but they also introduced something that plants don't tend to like: salt. And with the increased salinisation of the fields, yields of grain, particularly wheat, had declined steadily from the days of the Acadian Empire. Salt in the soil damaged the wheat crops and threatened the stability of the empire itself. Salt in the soil damaged the wheat crops to such an extent the entire stability of the region was at stake. A solution was found though in the form of barley. Long a crop harvested in the region, it exhibited a greater tolerance to the salt in the soil and gradually replaced wheat in the Mesopotamian fields. Other changes to the environment came from the new constructions instigated by Hammurabi as he conquered the regions and united most of Mesopotamia under his rule. Now, Hammurabi left behind a lot of information about his reign, usually found in the form of letters and tablets, which recorded his establishment of a government bureaucracy created to operate the machinations of his empire. Under his rule, Babylon established huge herds of livestock, a written system of laws, an effective and powerful military, advances in flood control and irrigation, and many other achievements that were wildly impressive. Unfortunately for Hammurabi and his legacy, his son, Samsu-iluna, proved to be pretty useless, and he possessed none of his father's talents for leadership. Hammurabi died around 1750 BC, and the empire he'd built so slowly and so carefully quickly fell apart. Hammurabi was remembered as both a conqueror and a minor god, as well as the lawgiver in his time. The Code of Hammurabi survived, inscribed as 282 separate laws on a stele, which during his reign was placed in a public square where it could be seen by all. The idea being that if all would fall under the law, all should be made aware of it. In 2023, the stele is located in the Louvre Museum in Paris. His acclaim as a lawgiver extends to the modern day. For example, in the United States, Hammurabi's likeness is visible on a frieze on the US Supreme Court building. It's also present on the chamber of the US House of Representatives in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Babylon itself was sacked by the Hittites under King Mursili in the 15th and 16th century BC. The exact date of the event is disputed by modern scholars, with a range of dates proposed which spans over 2 centuries, so we unfortunately can't be any more accurate for you. The period is part of what is often referred to in histories as the Dark Ages of Mesopotamia, a period of nearly non-stop war and conquest among various ancient peoples of the region over control of the fertile lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. During the early centuries following the birth of Christ, a series of caliphates emerged in the region of Mesopotamia, eventually coalescing into the Abbasid Caliphate in the 7th century AD. The Abbasid Caliphate descended from the Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, who has admittedly a much easier to pronounce name. Eventually, the Caliphate extended from modern-day Tunisia along the shores of North Africa to include what is now Saudi Arabia, further east of what is today Afghanistan and northward to modern-day Georgia. The Abbasids were an Arab people who ultimately made war or established diplomatic relations with the Persians and non-Arab Muslims, though they identified themselves as defenders of the true faith. In the mid-8th century AD, they established a new capital city for their empire, Baghdad, near the city of Babylon. From there, they ruled the caliphate for the ensuing several centuries, ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity in regards to culture, science, maths, medical, educational and astronomical advances. It became known as the Golden Age of Islam. The Grand Library of Baghdad was established during this age, also known as the House of Wisdom, for very good reason. The library was one of the largest public libraries in the entire ancient world. The era saw the introduction of staples such as algebra and the Arabic numeral system. Islamic scientists introduced the use of scientific method through experimentation. Islamic doctors advanced medical thinking in the identification of diseases from the different manner in which they presented themselves. The extensive use of paper as a medium of communication began in Baghdad, and the region became a major producer of paper as well as the site of hundreds upon hundreds of bookstores containing all manner of knowledge from all across the world. There were also significant advances in architecture, with mosques, mausoleums, monuments and mansions all reflecting new concepts and ideas of design and construction techniques. Despite the advance of civilization, the Abbasid Caliphate was also the scene of near constant warfare, from insurrections among various peoples to just open conflict with the Persians, the Byzantines and other Arab peoples, and eventually the Mongols of Central Asia. It was the latter who eventually conquered the Caliphate, sacked Baghdad and destroyed much of the cultural achievements of the Golden Age. The House of Wisdom, for example, was destroyed in 1258 AD. Its destruction was at the behest of Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, and it marked the end of the Golden Age of Islam. For 50 centuries of recorded human history, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers have bordered humanity at its best and, let's be honest, at its worst. Cultural advances within the regions they frame have been numerous and incredibly important to modern society, yet so have the conflicts between peoples, based on everything from ethnic differences to religious differences, lust for power, for land, for wealth, or just simply because they don't like one another. And in the 21st century, such conflict sadly continues. The Tigris is the easternmost of two rivers, its headwaters in the Taurus Mountains in today's Turkey. At 750 kilometers in length, it's the shortest of the two rivers and it flows through southeastern Turkey before forming parts of the border with Syria, and eventually it splits into several channels in Iraq before joining the Euphrates River at Shat al-Arab. From the sea, it's navigable only to Baghdad by shallow draft boats, and above Baghdad, navigable only by rafts. The Euphrates, on the other hand, is west of the Tigris for most of its 2,780 kilometre length. Likewise, it rises in the Taurus Mountains and flows through Turkey and Syria before entering Iraq. Both rivers receive most of their water volumes from snowmelt in the mountains and rainfall during the spring. Climate change has significantly reduced the amount of water both rivers discharge and contribute to the drying up of marshlands and other wetlands supported by the rivers since the most ancient of times. Both rivers are heavily dammed and have been since the Sumerians built irrigation dams and canals nearly 5,000 years ago. Other areas have been drained for reclamation as farmland with significant impact on the local ecology. The Mesopotamian marshes were a large area of wetland in the floodplains in the Tigris-Euphrates system. They were an ancestral home to the Marsh people of southern Iraq and neighbouring southwestern Iran. The Marsh people are predominantly Shia Muslims who live in accordance with the natural calendar and support themselves by raising rice, harvesting marsh plants and hoarding water buffalo. Following the first Gulf War in 1991, the government of Iraq's Saddam Hussein reinstituted an abandoned program to drain the Mesopotamian marshes. Both the Tigris and the Euphrates River were diverted to disrupt water flow to these marshes. The vast majority of the Shia population were forced to basically abandon their homes and livelihoods. Estimates are that 500,000 Marsh people who were once populated the area, as few as 1,600 remained by 2003. The wetlands themselves were turned basically into a desert. In 2003, after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates was gradually restored, though the wetlands have recovered somewhat in terms of again being marshland instead of desert. Much of the ecosystem it once supported has not returned. Nor have the Marsh people, with the majority continued to live in other areas of Iraq or having emigrated to Iran. The Mesopotamian marshes may not fully recover from the draining effects of the recent past, in part because the Tigris and Euphrates no longer supply water to the region in the same amounts they did just 40 years ago. Both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers have been dammed and diverted for various reasons over the last 5,000 years, largely to provide drinking water and irrigation water to local populations. In the 21st century, both rivers continue to be the target of damming for irrigation and power generation, as well as the creation of numerous reservoirs. Coupled with the adverse effects of climate change, the man-made changes to the rivers have significantly decreased the amount of water they carry to Iraq, which continues to rely on both rivers as a source of irrigation. In the late 20th and early 21st century, Turkey has exerted geopolitical control over its downstream neighbours, Syria and Iraq, through aggressive dam construction on both rivers. In particular, Turkey has built dams controlling reservoirs which can hold up to 70% of the annual flow of the Tigris, which would otherwise travel downstream to Iraq. Similar projects have been completed on the Euphrates, which effectively make both rivers potential weapons in international relations between the two countries. Iran also has severely restricted water flow downstream to Iraq and other rivers. The result of restrictions of water rights is understandably a cause of additional tensions between Iran, Iraq, Turkey and Syria. The water system is further complicated by the deteriorating quality of the water that it moves. Pollutants and toxins enter the waterways through effluents from oil drilling and from refining, pollutants from other industries and poorly managed wastewater systems, and from just runoff from agriculture. There have been outbreaks of diseases like cholera attributable directly to the water supply of the Tigris and Euphrates, including a cholera outbreak in 2018-2019, which saw over 100,000 Iraqis in and around Basra being hospitalised. In regards to human effluents, the modern city of Baghdad, which sits along the Tigris river system, produces more sewage daily than its wastewater treatment system is capable of handling. The excess, which is noted as being about double what the system can handle, has been dumped directly into the river for decades. Besides human waste and the effluents of industry, other toxins have been deliberately routed into the Tigris and Euphrates systems by terrorist groups. For example, in the mid-2010s, ISIS routinely dumped oil and metals into the rivers as well as the bodies of its victims, adding additional toxins to the dwindling levels of water in the rivers and their tributaries. The result of these and other actions is that the Tigris River has been identified in 2017 as a significant source of cancer. Keep in mind this is the primary source of water for the region, and it's also a primary source of cancer. That's not a good choice that you have to make of turn your taps on and get some water, maybe some cancer. And it's hard not to note the cruel irony of the Tigris and Euphrates river systems, once considered to be the life-giving sources of the original cradles of civilization, being reduced to significant sources of disease and death. For over 5,000 years, these two rivers have sustained life in the region. They have seen the birth of civilization, the rise and fall of empires, and the ethnic and religious strife that is such a part of human history. They have been exploited by humans who altered their courses and endured natural events and catastrophes such as earthquakes, floods, and severe droughts. Civilizations have struggled to exploit their resources while simultaneously denying them to others. What the future bodes for them is really anyone's guess. They exhibit all the challenges presented to the natural resources in the modern day, including pollution, overuse of water, political and ethnic and religious enmities along shared users, climate change, and many, many others I can't name because I'm running out of breath. According to numerous environmental groups, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are, to put it simply, dying, and they may have already passed the point of no return, which isn't terrifying at all. In 2021, the Journal of International Affairs published an article which cited the problems faced by the two rivers and an opportunity to build peaceful relationships in a region that has not known lasting peace for 5,000 years, stating, and I quote, "Environmental challenges offer opportunities for cooperation because they transcend political boundaries." It reported observing that these challenges can, and I quote, "be instrumental in building trust and understanding between social groups." Whether or not the challenges faced by the Tigris-Euphrates river system, and more importantly by the diverse peoples who rely on them for sustenance, can be resolved is a question only the future can answer. So thank you for tuning into this video. I apologise for it being quite dry, ironic considering it's about two big rivers, but something I've been trying to work on is balancing the idea of getting across as much information as possible while injecting my own personality into the subject. So I'm open to feedback from this in the comments of should it be drier? Should I inject more personality? Would you rather I just stick directly to the script and just repeat all the facts verbatim, or do you want me to inject more of my personality into it? Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video and would like to once again reiterate that this video was based on a script submitted by Larry Holsworth. Check out their social links below, and my own if you want to follow me on my own stuff. I also have a channel called Fact Theme with Karl Smallwood, and Wiki Weekends, where I just drink beer instead of coffee. And as always, go out there and have the day you all deserve.